Hi Fiona, really good to have you in today.
It's brilliant to be here, Danny.
We're doing this podcast to celebrate 20 years of Red Loft. And what I want to do today is kind of explore the last 20 years, talk about the future 20 years, and how our sector, the affordable housing sector, has changed massively over that period of time. And I thought a good way to kick that off would be for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, about what you've been doing over the last 20 years, because I think that's roughly when we first met, wasn't it?
It was Hackney. It was the early 2000s. You were an absolute gift to us, helping us to figure out estate renewal in Hackney, which eventually got off the ground, I think thanks to the hard work you did, I'd imagine. But I think 25 years ago, or maybe, 30 years ago, I was a temp for L&Q.
That's a full circle then, isn't it?
It is. I was a student in Newcastle and came to London to get a summer job because that's where you could earn money. And I found myself as a temporary housing officer in the Kennington neighbourhood office in Newburn Street, around the corner from here.
I remember that office.
Yeah, beautiful. It was like a little Victorian sweet shop. It was gorgeous. So, yeah, I fell in love with L&Q then. It was such a gorgeous place. And, of course, it was the summer and the sun shone. I went back to university and sort of forgot about L&Q for a while. But, yeah, it has changed incredibly in 20 years. L&Q particularly has changed. 20 years ago, we were about 30,000 homes. We're now close to 120,000 homes. We've acquired and merged with about 7 organisations in just over a decade. So, yeah, it's been fun. It's
really interesting because my last job before Red Loft, so Red Loft is 20 years old, was at L&Q. So I joined L&Q 26 years ago in their new business team. And saw that changing dynamic within the organisation. It was always a large organisation, but it grew and grew and grew. And I've seen over that 20 years how it's as you say, developed from 30,000 homes, which is big, but to 100,000, 120, whatever it is now, which is absolutely enormous, isn't it? And it's gone from being a regional London-based organisation to being a regional and national, and that presents its own problems as well
and opportunities.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think we now have homes from Preston right down to the Medway towns and everything in between. We do need to tidy up our geography a bit. We even have one home in Newport in Wales, so there is some work to be done on that. But yeah, the growth has been phenomenal, but in some ways vital. The country still has 8.4 million people inadequately housed. We only build, I think, about 59% of the homes we need each year, and only 31% of the affordable homes we need. Yeah. So we've got to keep building. We really have. But you'll see at L&Q also, we have recognised we need to invest in the existing homes as well. So we've just announced major contracts worth 2.9 billion for maintenance and investment, starting with safety, of course, fire safety, and bringing all of our homes up to EPC C level so that we can then really start to work on carbon neutrality after that. So it's going to be exciting times. The development team are going to be busy, the capital investment team are going to be busy, and that's pointing to the next 20 years. Keep building and keep looking after the homes we've got.
It's really interesting, isn't it, when you're talking about the amount of money you're going to spend on the existing stock, which is 2.9 billion, which is just so many noughts to think about, isn't it?
I've no idea how many noughts are in that.
It's just so many, isn't it? It's a huge amount of money to be spending and pushing through the economy. And that's the power of a large organisation, isn't it? And the power that L&Q has to set agendas and make things happen and be really transformative, which you couldn't do if you weren't that size.
You've got to use that power in the supply chain, haven't you, to get the best price you can, but also we're giving certainty to a bunch of companies at the minute, and within the contracts we let, there are going to be some SMEs. We're giving confidence to them that you've got 15 years worth of work, and if you do this right, you might have 30 years worth of work with us. And that's, in the current economic climate, that's got to be good. I still worry within that, though, about labour, where are we going to get people from, especially on the repairs and maintenance side, because it's a slightly different skill set. You need to be technically competent, but you've also got to be good with people because you're working in someone's home. So we're still really struggling getting maintenance staff.
It's been a problem ever since I've been in affordable housing, is getting good maintenance contractors. It's always seen as the holy grail. I think the margins are quite tight. 1%. Yeah, and that makes it very difficult to get good people in there. And when you do get good people in and they grow, they immediately want to start getting into refurbishment and larger scale refurbishment and turning homes where there is a greater margin. And so you see that good companies then morph into either developers or they want to get into new build, where the margins are slightly bigger, though still not great. And so you have that real issue all the time. And I think it's always been that way.
Yeah. We've got to grow our own in some way. Brexit was one thing. We knew that was coming for a long time. The government just seems to be incapable of really joining the dots between the need for house building, the need to repair and maintain those houses, and the drastic skills shortage in the country, and actually getting people enthused about working in the industry. If you take construction, you can be, at one end of it, you can be an archaeologist. At the other end of it, you could be a tunnelling specialist and work all around the world. It's just, and everything in between. You can do computer-aided design. It's just so exciting. But how many kids grow up in primary schools and say, I want to be a builder? They don't, because they think it's dirty, it's horrible. If you're a woman, you think it's sexist and misogynistic and awful. So we've got to do something about that.
It's really interesting you say that, because one of the podcasts earlier, we had Helen Bunch in from Waits. And we had a great chat, and a lot of that focused around that perception of construction and people's idea of this kind of low-paid, unskilled, dirty, cold job that construction is perceived to be, when there is a little bit of that, but actually that's a very, very small part of it. And in fact, it's an incredibly well-paid job. I mean, you look at what project managers or construction managers on sites earn, and they can be earning 120 grand upwards to deliver big complex projects. And all the consultants and the technical that goes into that are also, really high qualified, very skilled, very technical jobs. And I think you're right, we do need to be promoting it in our schools, that this is a really good industry to be going into. And I've always been a massive advocate for that, because I've always loved this industry. I've always loved construction. I've always loved affordable housing. And it's given me a really good career and a really enjoyable one. And no day is ever the same. And it's not just office-based as well. So there are so many positives to it. And as you say, we need to be promoting it with women as well.
What we have seen over the last 20 years as well is shared ownership for us has been a brilliant product. And I'll come back to it's getting a little bit of a reputation at the minute that I don't think it deserves. But that point about trying to get a mortgage for the first time, it's the idea of the deposit and a 10% deposit needed to get your average mortgage. And if you think, how much the average home, about 440,000, that's an awful lot of saving that you have to do. Yeah, or bank of mum and dad, and who the hell has that? So where shared ownership has been incredibly useful for a lot of our residents is you're paying deposit on the 25% share, for example, that you want to buy, and then you can staircase up to own the whole thing. So that's been brilliant. Where it has got difficult recently, two things for us. One of them is in London around fire safety. They're just, you've got to work through your fire safety remediation programme step by step. You can't do it all at once. Even if you had all the money and all the labour and all the resources, you just wouldn't be able to physically do it. So some of our shared owners are in a sort of a holding pattern, waiting for the works to be finished. Now, they know they're not going to have to pay for them because one way or another, L&Q or a government grant is going to pay, or in a very small number of cases, we've got contractors coming back and being prepared to do the right thing and pay up as well. But just at the minute, you got mortgage rates going up, you've got rents going up, and you've got service charges hit by inflation. So as a shared owner, you get a triple whammy. But I think that's short term, and the new type of shared ownership model that the government bring in, where you're protected from any repairs for 10 years, is going to be brilliant. They're not going to be able to sell 1% shares because there's no lender is going to touch someone who can only afford a 1% share, I'm afraid.
I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think shared ownership's getting a bad name, but actually these are issues of leaseholders.
Exactly.
These are not
Yes.
shared ownership issues. And we do need leasehold reform, and we need greater leasehold reform to look at that. And it's an issue that, as time has come, I think, because freeholders have had too much power over leasehold issues and about people's homes. But I'm a massive advocate for shared ownership as well. I think it's a really good product. I think it does help a huge number of people who don't access affordable housing for rent. And we sell a lot of shared ownership. We do about 300, sometimes 400 homes a year. And I look at who we're housing, and it is all the people that we need to be housing. It is teachers, it is nurses, it is police, it is all those what we used to call key workers, who are all getting in there. It's also increasingly as well, we're seeing many professionals as well who are probably wanting to buy in other areas, who are moving into those areas because they can't afford it. So that's quite an interesting change. But I think it's a good stretch of government grant as well, because it doesn't require as much, but it keeps, particularly in London, people able to live near where they work, and stops the hollowing out of London to ending
Just being for the rich.
all the very poor. So that's what we end up with. We end up with just the very rich or the very poor, and not the people in between.
What's interesting about shared ownership at the moment as well is investors' interest in it.
Yes.
Yeah, which is...
It's going to be really interesting to see, because with Help to Buy going, there are some discussions, I think, with house builders about maybe doing their own Help to Buy schemes, but also what's going to replace Help to Buy. And lots of them are looking at shared ownership and looking actually at private shared ownership and models for themselves. And that's because of the increase in interest rates. Before it was a less attractive if you're charging 2.75 for your rents and you can borrow at 1.5. Then you think, oh, this isn't a great product. But if you're going to be borrowing at 4 or 5, which traditionally has been where we've been at and where the shared ownership model comes from, it's a really, really good product and really good value for money. And I think some of the house builders and some of the developers are going to be looking at that as a way of bringing forward homes and making them more affordable, particularly within the capital, where, as you say, you have to be 32 and earning
Squillions.
a lot, or having a lot of money coming out of your mum and dad before you can actually purchase.
I spent 4 hours with Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves in Milton Keynes recently, and we did a round table with some people from Milton Keynes housing waiting list. And they were desperate to buy. I mean, one of them was a paramedic, couldn't afford to buy, but yet was paying over £2,000 a month in rent. So he could easily afford a mortgage. Yeah. But do you know that they'd never heard of shared ownership? So it was, help. Yes. Yeah, so I spent some time explaining shared ownership, and they went, wow, this is it.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, because one of them...
Did they say, who do I have to share with? Because that's what everybody used to say.
No, they didn't. But there was one family, they'd had to move every 2 years for the last decade because the landlords, they'd been very unlucky with landlords wanting to sell up. And you think, well, yeah, you are paying a bit of rent, but we're not going to move you at any stage. That is your home. Yeah. And it's that stability that, especially people with kids and getting kids into school, you just want to live in the same place if you can do it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. The first thing I did when I started, when I was doing Vicky's job, which is, nearly 5 years ago, was there's a guy called Matthew Said. Have you come across him?
Yeah, Sideways.
Yeah. Oh,
I love his podcast.
Well, it's just absolutely brilliant. I got to meet him last week or the week before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Mount Anvil brought him in as a speaker to a breakfast event. And, you know, they say never meet your heroes. Well, this guy exceeded expectations.
Oh, really?
He's just so engaging, incredible. He was even better in real life. But it was his book, Black Box Thinking, that I was encouraging all the construction leaders to read, because the parallels for me were very clear. The airline industry gets safer and safer and safer. It's safer to fly now than ever because of that black box approach. When something does go wrong, everybody, the manufacturer, the pilots, the airline, everybody gets around the table and is completely honest with each other about what went wrong. And everybody brings everything onto the table in a very transparent way. Whereas the medical profession in the UK, it was getting more and more dangerous to go into hospital because of a fear of medical negligence cases. People were they were going like this, putting their arms around us. That doesn't work on radio, does it? Actions like that. But people were putting their arms around the problem and just going, oh, don't worry, keep your nose out of this, I'll fix it. And I was saying to the construction teams, that's what you need to do now. You need to be very honest about what's gone wrong. And hopefully something like the Grenfell, the inquiry, and, well, at least Pete App's coverage of the inquiry is starting to bring a level of transparency, if not honesty, to what's happening in construction.
I think that we talked about this in an earlier podcast as well about, I think we're quite bad as an industry about saying we tried something, it didn't work, but let's learn from what didn't work and try again at finding a solution for that, and try again and try again. But we go, oh, well, and we hide it, and we're embarrassed by it, rather than saying, had a go, didn't work, going to have another go, going to try this now, going to try this now. And I think that's, if you have your own construction company, then you can do that. And you can push forward and you can make those changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think is really quite exciting part and a big off-spin that you wouldn't have thought that you would get out of running your own construction company. I did want to talk about thinking about how you think things are going to go forward. So what's the next 20 years going to bring us? So, and it's, how do you think things are going to change? What are the big drivers you see? So what's your, at L&Q, what's the next 5 years going to bring you? And then the 5 years after that and the 5 years, what do you see as the issues that you're facing? You touched on 2.9 billion for investing in your own stock. You talked about building 3,000 homes a year.
Yeah.
I'm sure with a bit of support that will go up. I know WACO's always looking at innovative ways of increasing that. What are those? Are those the main issues, or other things that you think for L&Q that are top of your list?
Yeah, I do think the 3,000 homes a year is a minimum. I do think we need to ramp that up gradually, but not to do it in the old L&Q way of where we're going to build 10,000 a year and we're going to be bigger than Barrett's. I think we've got to do that in a sustained way, because we've got to grow our construction business to be sustainable and capable of delivering. What I'm worried about next is about carbon neutrality and what do we do on that, because I'm not ashamed to say at the minute we're looking at safety and existing homes from a point of view of just getting to people to EPCC, never mind anything else, and not even got my head around how we look at our supply chain into all of that. I dread to think what's involved in the manufacture of concrete and steel to make our homes. But that's where we're going to have to go. That's, and this has got to be genuine. It's got to be real, ungreenwashed. It's, a lot of our investors at the moment are obsessed with it, but in a very superficial way. So we've got to...
What, the ESG tick box?
The ESG tick box, yes. Now, the S and the G for a housing association is really dead easy. But there's got to be a step change for all of us on the E. What's bothering me most, though, is we've seen with cars, we've seen the government say combustion engine is dead. So the whole car industry tilts its R&D to what's the best electric technology.
Yeah.
Nobody's doing the same for residential and particularly retrofit. I think we can get our new builds to fabulous, as carbon neutral as we can make our supply chain, but fabulous standards. But 90% of the stock, 99% of the stock is already in existence in this country. What are we going to do? I live in an Edwardian house. And everything my husband suggests that will improve its energy efficiency is just so appalling to me in aesthetic terms. Yeah, he wants to render it at one stage. So he gets shouted down a lot. But a lot of our stock is old. What are we going to do? And how do we move towards carbon neutrality in a way that doesn't penalise the poor? Because some of these electric boilers, air source heat pumps, they are more expensive to run. That's not fair. And nobody seems to be doing this and coming up with solutions at scale. There are individual Victorian terrace houses in Manchester or wherever where, that's fantastic, but what does that cost you? Is that £100,000 per home? I can't do that with 120,000 homes.
Yes, I think I was talking to Claire Benny about this very and she reckoned it was going to cost 100,000 to improve every home. It's not 20 or 30 grand. It is 100,000.
It is, yeah.
And where does that come from?
Yeah.
And that has to be a central government commitment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You have to have grants.
Yeah.
You have to have the money coming in from somewhere.
Yeah. You have to. And every second day I get an email from some financial investor who said, "Oh, well, I can do this. I can pay for this for you." Like, and what's your return? Oh, the return will be that energy costs for residents will be reduced. So how does that end up in your pocket?
Yeah.
So none of these business models work yet. We've got to do this. We've got to do it for the next generation. We've got to do it for the people who live in these homes. There's so many reasons. But I don't know what the answer is, and I hate not knowing what the answer is.
Well, unless the energy costs are part of the rent, there's no incentive for a landlord to do that. So that offset is never, ever going to work.
Never
going to work.
Yeah.
So you'd have to change that completely.
Yeah. And then I continue to worry in the next 20 years about labour and labour shortages because of that point I made earlier. There's no joining up between government departments around housing, education, skills, investment.
The labour shortage is a really interesting, and the skills shortage that we're going through.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I run a company which is based on filling gaps where there are those skill shortages, and I saw that 20 years ago when we set up.
Yeah.
But it's increased massively. I mean, we've grown from a company of 3 to we're now 45 staff, and associates takes us up to about 60.
Yeah.
And we could be a lot bigger if we wanted to be.
Yeah.
And it's about getting the right people in. And I'm now facing the same issues that everybody's facing in terms of getting people who have the right skill sets and also the right culture and the right philosophy that I can trust to work within Red Loft.
Yeah.
And then I see it within housing associations and local authorities and developers and contractors and builders and every walk. I mean, we see it in planners as well. There just aren't the people with the level of skill, not the level of the level of skill and experience that we need to deliver at the scale that we need to deliver at. And I'm not convinced we're getting enough people through at a younger level who are then going to be filling those places as we retire. And it's a real issue. And I think part of it is that we've not had enough graduate schemes for a very long time. I remember none of the housing associations wanted to have graduate schemes, and we've got Red Loft. I mean, I know that they're all doing it now, but we had a better graduate scheme of we had 20 people than lots of the other housing associations.
I know, it's absolutely vital. Really is vital that we have apprenticeships, we have graduate schemes. We've got to keep doing this. And back to the very where we started, really. We've got to excite people about construction, about development. I mean, it's fascinating.
Yes. And if you've got somewhere like Lincoln, you can offer
the whole
package, can't you?
You
can offer anybody almost everything that they want to do within that, from being on site to being a PM or sales, the whole piece, as well as all the management and maintenance and all of that.
And the really exciting sort of investment and treasury side as well, which is also, how do we raise money? How do you talk to investors? How do you talk to banks? It's a brilliant career.
Don't you, L&Q, don't they come and talk to you?
Yeah, there's a bit of that, Well, my finance director would tell you that, but, sometimes we have to go to them.
Been great to have you in today. Thanks a lot.
I loved it. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Fiona.